earliest past of the feminine correct landscape, men are raised not just to internalize, but to evangelize about other boys, men. This is why we see such polarization and violent reaction to people's political, religious, and intersocial, intersexual, etc. beliefs. They perceived it as a personal attack, even when presented with irrefutable evidence that challenges the assertion of their belief. One common frustration that the red pill awareness expresses is how difficult it is to open their blue pill friend's eye as to why he is not hooking up, why he is not getting dates. However, we see blue pill men tenaciously cling to the moralistic sense of purpose for their methods, which is only reinforced by popular culture in our media, our music, e-harmony, our religion, etc. What they fail to realize, and what becomes cemented for them in denial, is that what they believe are their own indigenous, self-righteously correct beliefs were modified for them by a feminine-centric influence. This influence began in our most formative years. Our blue pill ego investment were taught to us as part of our earliest socialization. For women and men steeped in this feminine correct conditioning, just being presented with the possibility that ego investment is that correctness is the result of a childhood and young adulthood conditioning that predisposes them to it will seem presumptuous because making them aware of it challenges who they are as a person. If you attack the belief, you attack the person. While I was writing this section, I got into an exchange on Twitter with a very pro-feminist girl who asked me why I thought feminism was anything other than equality for both genders. While I knew that her conditioned ego investment in feminism would make any revolution of her impossible, I proceeded to make my case that the latent purpose of the feminism was unilaterally facilitate hypergamy by removing all constraints of feminine or female sexuality while maximally restricting male sexuality. Needless to say, that made her apoplectic. Her simplistic gut response was something to the effect of, "You think feminine is all about limiting dicks?" But it didn't make me aware that any red pill truth I could confront her with was going to offend her preconditioned feminine correct sensibilities. By even suggesting that the better part of the Western culture is conditioned from its formative years to default to the feminine seems conspirational, but as I stated in the prior book, the conditioning isn't the result of some shadowy cabal feminist social engineers, but rather an evolving social undercurrent that is by far stronger without any kind of centralization. In fact, that's what makes this conditioning so endemic. There is no single source to trace it back to. What makes unplugging so difficult is coming to realize red pill awareness is what feels like a natural state of feminine difference. Our earliest education teaches boys to gender self-loathe, while simultaneously teaching the unquestioning, unqualified value of the feminine mother, sister, girlfriend, wife. For women, respect is taught to be presumed given, not earned as it must be among boys. It is also important to consider that this default respect is an integral part of men's male protector psychological predisposition. Protect mom, protect sister, protect the girls, carry their books home from school, and unwavering give them the differences that natural weaknesses should afford them is part of the protective mentality boys are both taught and have a natural affinity for. This aspect of male mind, which predisposes boys to pedestalize girls, is really less about respect and more about calling innate approval for girls, that is, the savior schema. It is the first manifestation of the male deductive logic in solving the problem of earning a girl's favor. The feminine imperative has learned how to recognize and exploit these differences by including it as an integral part of the future men's early conditioning. Pedestals. One of the first things men are made aware of when they come into a red pill awareness is their own predisposition to pedestalize a woman they are interested in. When this tendency to put into pedestal is paired with a scarcity mentality, this will develop into a status of a 90s a man will have to a woman. This pedestalization is usually the first barrier a man must break in order to move on to other aspects of game and red pill understanding. But it is important to highlight this tendency because it is such deeply internalized aspect of a man's earliest conditioning that female primary conditioning plays on his natural protective instincts and then pairs with a subtle revaluation of the feminine that always exists his own. From that point, a boy can extrapolate a woman's intrinsic value in relation to his own capacity to attract a particular woman as a man. This is really the heart of our 90s. An unhealthy or nothing devotion based on the psychosis that distorts a woman's valuation of him beyond all realistic appraisals, depending on his own valuation to women on whole. This has the potential to exacerbate a scarcity mentality that was all of his early conditioning. He'll never find another girl so fine, and he literally can't live without me. Pedestalization conditioning can be learned in the home, but commonly it is school, church, the media, popular culture, an adolescent peer group, and even former male school spaces conventionally reserved for only boys and men as the female influence pervades into them. The feminine imperative is the priority even when it seems the boy's self-importance and arrogance supersedes it. That's not to say boys don't resist this influence or hold themselves in higher respect in given social contexts, but it is to say that the conditioning influences of the feminine sets the context in which it can be resisted. In other words, those boys' actions are only incorrect based on the feminine primary definition of correctness, not prioritizing, not pedestalizing girls, women in the incorrect, shameable behavior. Early feminine conditioning predisposes boys to ego-invest themselves in becoming men who will prioritize women's wants and needs for their own. The lady's first response is the conditioned response to any intergender exchange. This then becomes the first gem of beta mindset for men deferring to feminine part of his intrinsic personality. His difference becomes an unquestionable part of just who he is, chivalry. Most of what men believe is, or was, chivalry is really a bastardized form of the initial concept courtesy of the Hollywood and the romanticizations. The concept of chivalry prevailed in our first condition of feminine difference. This chivalry is simply one of the ideologies that are subsumed by the westernized romanticism. Chivalry also applied toward things such as not hitting a man while he wasn't looking or attacking brutally undefended inferior or even a respected foe. It was originally intended in the westernized form as a code of ethics determined by the Roman Catholic Church to control the otherwise lawless and violent natures of the soldiers and knights who, understandably, had a tendency of brigadism in the Middle Ages. However, there were also similar codes in the feudal Japan, that is, Bushido. What passes for most people's understanding of chivalry is actually a classic interpretation and bastardization of the Western Romanticism and the ideologies of the courtly love, which ironically enough was also an effort by the women of the period intended to better control the men in the early and the high Renaissance eras. Essentially, it mounted to a taming of the over-dominant masculine influence of the time by laying out the system of prescribed appropriate conditions necessary to satisfy a woman's access to her intimacy. Functionally, this chivalry becomes the feminism of its time and indirectly served much of the same feminine interest for women who relied on indirect power. Like today's push for women to better identify with the feminine, the idea of courtly love was to encourage men to explore their feminine sides with the odds of divine expression of love, offerings of fantastic, often life-threatening, feats to prove one's direction or presenting gifts beyond compare to again prove one's worth of necessity to the object of his desire, hers being the only operate in the strategy that doesn't hold their true best interest. Conditioned men cling to those investments because they seem like a noble ideal for which they have been trained to expect will be rewarded with a mutually shared, mutually acknowledged, hope-free, less conditional love, respect, and devotion, but also accesses urgency and frequency of the best sex of their life. The red pill wipes away the hope inherent in that idealism because it is more accurately and reliably predicts human behavior, that feminism, or that feminine condition, that tough, offensive pill to swallow after a lifetime of ego investment in a wavering, unreliable, or failed drive for the promised rewards of blue-pilled ideals. That conditioning predisposes men to believing what should be true. Even just the objective questioning of feminine primacy beliefs, to say nothing red pill assertion triggers shock, outrage, and disbelief that any sane person could ever ask such a question. Even just the objective questioning of feminine primacy beliefs, to say nothing of red pill assertion, triggers shock, outrage, and disbelief that any sane person could ever ask such a question.
Equalism. As I stated earlier, what a lot of feminists hate about red pill theory is that it simply does a better job of predicting social behavior than feminism ever has. I like to think that red pill awareness has fundamentally altered, or enlightened if you like, intergender interpretation and understanding in a relatively short time, but that would be a mistake. There is a distinct group of self-envisioning red pill guys who like to remind us in various forums that it hasn't always been thus. Their story is one of how our forefathers knew better with regard to how men and women ought to interact with one another, and essentially spelled this out for future generations in the religious and the philosophical text of antiquity. While I can't deny the merit of this, I also know that the men of those bigger eras didn't have anything approaching the mass of information and the connectivity men possess today. It's easy to get caught up in the romanticization idea that back in I listen to NPR, and while I know bias will always be an inevitable part of the media, I couldn't help but assess what a morass that attempting to define masculinity has become to contemporary men. Each story, each attempt to redefine masculinity, relied on the same tired tropes of feminine imperative has been using for men since the start of the sexual evolution. Weaknesses, vulnerability is sold as strength. Submissiveness and compromise to female is sold as support and deserving of praise and reciprocal appreciation, while never manifesting in women, which never manifest in women. Beta is the alpha, alpha is insecurity, bluster, and compensation. Those are the main premises, and to a large degree, most red pill awareness male realize that behavior is only true determinant of motivation and reject the feminist, egalitarian, equalist messaging. However, what still surprises me is that this same deliberate effort to cast doubt on what masculinity should be for a man hasn't changed its message or methods of conditioning men to accept this masculine confusion for over 50 years now. Although the mid-80s and up to now, the idea of anything positively masculine is either ridiculed, cast as misogynistic, or implies a man might be gay if he is too celebratory of his maleness. Since the start of the sexual revolution, any definition of what masculinity truly should mean has been subject to the arbitrary approval of feminine imperative. In the absence of clear definition of what masculinity is for men, the feminine imperative is free to create a grosso straw man of ugly masculinity, or as beatific a feminized model of masculinity as needs to serve its purpose. Useful chivalrous moralism, branding and distorting conventional masculinity, raising and conditioning men to accept ambiguity and doubt about security of a manhood they are encouraged not to define for themselves. All of these are methodologies and teaches things should be versus evolved impulsive realism, the way things are. The doctrine of equalism presumes a socialist expectation of being turned on or attracted to men exemplifying a gender equitable, equalistic correct mindset, and the evolved visceral arousal attraction to a man exhibiting the dominant characteristic traits of masculine contemporarity. Another example of this conflict can be found in our own SC choreography. In 2008, the transnational nature of sex for equitable services was an overblown meme. The message then was that men needed to be more feminine typical chores around the house, and the equitable exchange would be his wife reciprocating this more frequent and more intense sex as a result of his equitable participation in the negotiation. Fast forward to 2013, and now, by the same author mind you, hey fellas, put down those vacuum cleaners and pull out the lawnmowers. Married men may think helping around the house will up the hotness quotient in the bedroom, but that really matters in the type of chore. Heterosexual married men who spend their time doing yard work, paying bills and changing the oil have more sex than husbands who spend their time cooking, cleaning, and shopping, according to a new study on the subject of housework and sex. Households with more traditional gender division of labor report higher sexual frequency than households with less traditional gender division of labor. So what you see illustrated here, in just the space of 5 years, is the frustration and the conflict between an equalist idealist model versus the evolved complementary model of gender relations. It is not about the equitability of like-for-like exchanges or like-for-like reward benefit, but rather the way that equitability is expressed and how it graced against instinctual human expectation and behavior. Sex differences, biologically and psychologically, didn't evolve for hundreds of thousands of years to be equal partnership based on humanistic or moralistic idealism. They evolved into a complementary form of support where the aspect of one sex strength compensated for another weakness and vice versa. For every behavioral manifestation of one sex and strategy, hypergamy in females and other sex evolved psychologically, sociologically, and behavioral contingencies to counter it, mate guarding in males. The ideal state